Empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? First 6 seconds, point A to point B, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go. Welcome to the Scoop World Order. Phil Steele, 2 weeks out from the Notre Dame game edition. I'm so excited. I have two of my favorite guys on this earth on today's show. I have the great Phil Steele and I also have the great Bill the Bank Greene together. This is going to be one of those spectacular shows that you're going to want to watch over and over again because these guys getting together talking college football is going to be something special. So that being said, as always, appreciate you guys. Give this a like, subscribe to the channel, comment. What do you want? What did you like about this interview? I mean, Phil Steele's going to bring it today. Bank's going to bring it today. This is going to be something great. So I'm going to get right to it. I'm not even going to wait. Fellas, how are you? Mr. Steele, appreciate you as always. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, a real pleasure, Kirk. And it's always a lot of fun talking football, but always a lot more fun when the games are actually being played. So we're getting close.
Yeah, we're at week 0 this weekend. We talked 2 weeks ago. I'm going to start off with Bank. Bank, I know you've been chomping at the bit. And anyone that's listening to this, you know, the Phil Steele preview magazines are on the shelves basically everywhere now. Barnes and Noble. They're on Amazon if you're not close to a store, if you're in a more rural area. But I got mine, actually about 2 of mine. I was reading it at dinner with my wife for my anniversary. She's ready to kill me, but hey, you know, it's more interesting than conversation with someone you've been married to for 6 years, so whatever. But I'm gonna hand this right to Bank because Bank, I know you're dying to ask some of these questions to Phil. He's been a longtime Phil Steele guy. You never actually met him or talked to him before, so this is going to be amazing today. So Bank, started off. What's your first question you got for Phil?
Yeah, I know his background. I know how he got started. You know, he was a crazed fan as a 10-year-old playing parlay cards. It's an amazing story. Bill, the first thing I want to say is I have the magazine. I'm holding it up right now. It's easy to say we follow the magazine, but I can show mine. Mine goes on my desk. This is the official start of college football for me, is when I received my Phil Steele magazine. Phil, we have a thread on our message board about Phil Steele's magazine. It starts mid-July, and people are chomping at the bit to get this thing. When did you finally realize that you went from like a niche guy to a voice in the college football world? When did you realize that?
Yeah, I tell you, it probably took about 5 to 7 years of the magazine. This is the 28th year we've been doing the magazine, but
Wow.
each year it gets bigger and bigger, and the people using the magazine. And you know, back when I started, back in 1995, there was probably 21, 22 magazines on the market where you could go and pick up any of those magazines. And now there's probably 3 or 4 left on the market. But the beautiful thing about the magazine is it's quicker and easier reference than the internet. And I spent 7 months on this thing. It's become the Bible of college football, where basically every radio guy, every TV guy, and every real college football fan has to have the magazine every year. And that's why we continue to put all this work and effort into it. 7 full months it takes us to produce this thing each year.
Wow. I mean, that's unbelievable. I know it's got to be almost a labor of love for you. I know it has to be financially profitable, but there has to be more to it than that. This almost has to, I know you have a daughter, but this has to be close, you know, to a child for you.
Yes, absolutely. You hit it right on the head. And really, college football is my life. If you ask me about NBA basketball, I might know that LeBron James played for the Cleveland Cavaliers some time ago, but that's about my extent of NBA knowledge. Baseball knowledge, I can tell you by looking at scores that the Indians are doing somewhat well this year, but I can't even tell you the players on the team. But college football, that's my forte, and that's all I do 365 days of the year.
Another thing I always wanted to ask you, you're also a tremendous handicapper, a great prognosticator. When I break down these teams, when I'm looking at making my SEC prediction or my ACC, I go by in this order. I go head coach, quarterback, defense, offensive line, and intangibles. Those are my 5 go-to factors. How do you break down when you want to rank the top teams in the Big Ten or the top teams in the ACC? What is your go-to method?
Yeah, I think you hit the majority of them right on the head. I think we're very similar in that respect. The head coach is extremely important in college football. And this year I talked to 120 of the 131 head coaches out there. I would put quarterback next, then defensive line. I'd specialize that a little bit. You
Okay.
get pressure on the quarterback, and that's a big plus. Then the offensive line, and like you said, the intangibles. And my magazine's loaded with metrics. Close wins, close losses, turnovers
Yeah.
equals turnaround, YPG factor, things where the team was better than their record last year or the team was weaker than their record last year, like Michigan State being outgained in Big Ten play by 63 yards per game, or Nebraska outgaining foes last year by 53 yards per game. All that stuff is huge to me, but I think the five that you picked out there were perfect, right in line, and that's really how you analyze a team. But do keep in mind, a lot of folks discount teams if they don't have any experience at quarterback. We saw last year a team at Ohio State had no experience at quarterback, and they did pretty well. And Alabama as well got all the way to the national title game with a first-year starting quarterback. So you just because your quarterback doesn't have experience, it does not mean that you're not any good at that position.
With
Yeah.
Ohio State, Kirk, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good, Bang. I was just going to say, to touch on that, Phil, how much do you evaluate the infrastructure around a first-year quarterback like a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud? Obviously, Ohio State had veteran tackles coming back. They had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave coming back. Ryan Day's been a guru tutoring quarterbacks. How much is that a factor in kind of ignoring the career starts at quarterback stat, or even if you just project, they get Justin Fields or they get a young phenom like CJ Stroud, how much has that led you to kind of discount the no experience at quarterback?
It's definitely huge, and
Mm-hmm.
you take a look at some teams, they have a veteran quarterback, but no starters back on the offensive line. They're under pressure all year, and their stats actually drop, even though they're experienced. So that definitely has to factor in. You take a look at Minnesota as an example. A couple of years ago, their quarterback had a fantastic season. He was throwing to a couple of NFL guys at wide receiver. Since then, Tanner Morgan's been an average quarterback. He hasn't had the same type of receivers to throw to. So all that stuff has to be factored in. I think when the general public looks at a team, they look at the quarterback, running back, receivers. I'm a little different. I factor in heavy emphasis on the offensive line, defensive line, and then the intangibles. And that's probably what's made the magazine the number one most accurate over the last 28 years.
With Ohio State specifically, there's so much excitement right now with Jim Knowles coming in as the D coordinator. A year ago, I would bet 5% of Ohio State fans had ever heard of Jim Knowles. I know you've known about him since his Duke days and probably Cornell days. How much of a difference can Jim Knowles make to this team?
I think it make a huge difference. I think he steps into a perfect situation this year because Ohio State's defense is not bereft of talent. They have a lot of talent at each of the positions. I thought last year the linebacking core grossly underperformed. This year, when you look at the talent they have there, they should be much better. The defensive line, I think, can be a lot better. I go back and look at those games that Ohio State played against ranked teams last year, where they gave up 31 points per game, 415 yards per game. And that simply can't happen, especially with the amount of players and talent that they have on that side of the ball. They really go three deep at every position. They've got VHTs at every position. So I think under a new defensive coordinator, they're going to make drastic strides this year.
I think their over-under win totals 10.5. What are your thoughts on 10.5?
If you don't play that at 10.5, I mean, you look at Ohio State's schedule this year, they're a double-digit favorite in every single game. If Ohio State loses one game during the regular season this year, I'd be shocked. They'd have to lose two games for you to lose that bet. How do you not play them at 10.5? And I'll give you this. I think the numbers this year on the big teams are all 10.5 because last year the big boys struggled. Now, here's the thing I want to point out to you. Like I said, I talked to all the head coaches. Last year, I would say 90% of the head coaches told me, Phil, this is the deepest team we've ever had. We were able to go 3 deep in the spring because everybody was back due to COVID. I had to readjust my experience chart in the front of the magazine because every team had 17, 18, 19, 20 returning starters. Who didn't have that? Well, it was the big boys, the ones that lost talent to the NFL. So Ohio State not only didn't win the Big Ten, heck, they didn't even make the Big Ten title game. Clemson, they didn't win the ACC. Heck, they didn't even make the ACC title game. Oklahoma, not even in the Big 12 title game. Even Alabama last year, they lost to Texas A&M. They needed a 2-point conversion to get stopped to get past Florida. They barely got past LSU, and they should have lost to Auburn at the end of the year. They needed a late touchdown and 4 overtimes to win that, or else they wouldn't even have made the playoff last year. So the big boys were at a huge disadvantage last year. Now the playing field's even. Ohio State's back to the middle of the road. Alabama's back to the middle of the road experience-wise. They're on an even thing with everyone else. If you get 10.5 on the big boys, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, jump on it because those teams are all, if they lose one game, I'd be surprised.
Another thing I want to ask you, and I hate to dominate this, Kirk, but
do it, Bill. Do it, Bill. Please.
Go here. He's the guru. When you look at the Ohio State schedule and you look at Jim Knowles, they play a lot of similar styles this year. Okay, the Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, Michigan, they're all going to attack Ohio State the same way. They don't, they're all going to be run the ball, control the game the way Michigan did last year. Does that make it easier for Knowles in that you don't have a varying degree of offenses you're going to face this year?
Yeah, that's always a plus. And, you take a look, there's no Purdue on the schedule. You know that Jeff Prom likes to throw the football around the field. So that's a big plus there. I definitely like the type of offenses they're taking on. That will be a plus. Like I said, Jim Knowles is going to look like a genius at the end of this year because Ohio State's defense is going to be vastly improved.
Wow. Kirk, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, with Jim Knowles, obviously, schematically, people are excited about that. But in your experience, Phil, when you have a team that was as young as Ohio State was last year, and then, they weren't getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback last year. The linebackers were young. I mean, they were extremely young. And I dealt with this in 2004 when we were mostly freshmen and sophomores and took our lumps. We went 8-4. The next year, we were almost completely back. Quarterback was back. Most of the O-line was back. Defense was completely back. How much of it is an experience thing along with Jim Knowles' is enhanced scheme? Because I always feel like, sometimes these coordinators walk into great situations where a defense or an offense, they kind of take their lumps. I kind of felt like that with Urban Meyer. In 2011, Braxton was a freshman. He was absolutely clueless, was running for his life. So he kind of took his lumps. He got, 10 starts under his belt. And then he comes in and you have a young team that got beat down, but they had a lot of guys back that played a lot. And then now you can kind of, put your stamp on them like Jim Knowles will with this defense that's now actually somewhat veteran. How does that, compute when you talk about, teams coming back and what they can do during the season?
I think it's huge. And, look at the numbers on Ohio State on my experience chart. Last year, they were number 129, which you would expect. Like I said, everybody else was very experienced. The big boys weren't. This year, they're number 44 in my experience chart. So you take all the talent Ohio State has, and you put them number 44 in the experience chart, where they're ahead of actually 2/3 of the game. I think it's going to make a massive difference this year, not only for Ohio State, but for the Alabamas. Alabama doesn't normally have that many close games like they did last year. For the Clemsons, I think you'll see a return to power. I've got Oklahoma favored in every game this year. So I think all the big boys being more experienced is going to be a big plus.
Phil, when you look at Ohio State specifically last year, and it was pretty obvious that, the defense let them down, just wasn't up to snuff. When you look at the conversion to Jim Knowles, do you think his style of defense will mesh with what Ryan Day wants to do on offense, where he wants to push the pace, he wants to throw the ball all over the yard? That leads to a lot of quick possessions. When they score quickly, puts the defense back on the field. Do you think Day and Knowles will mesh as one unit?
Yeah, I do think they will. And, in this era of college football, almost everybody's pushing the football offensively. And so, he played with Gundy. Gundy runs a fast paced offense over there, and he was able to adapt. Now, the thing about the Knowles defense, there is some complexities to it. You may not have the best Jim Knowles defense his first year as players get used to it, but I like the overall experience the defense has. And yeah, I believe he will completely mesh with Ryan Day, and the fact that Gundy's a guy that likes to push the tempo as well.
When we look at this Ohio State team, I've always been under the impression that when you win the SEC, generally you are a monster of a team. To get through that league, win the SEC championship game, you're a monster. And I feel the normal Big Ten team, the Ohio State team that got shut out by Clemson, the Michigan team that didn't belong on the field last year. I think a normal Big Ten team doesn't match up with that monster that comes out of the SEC. Can this Ohio State team be a monster?
Yeah, I think they can this year. In fact, I rate their offense number one in the country. You've got three Heisman Trophy candidates there: C.J. Stroud, Trevion Henderson, Jackson Smith-Njigba. You've got a vastly improved offensive line, and then defensively, I expect big time improvement there. I rate their defense number 7, their offense number 1. And to give you an example, I've got Alabama number 2 on offense, number 1 on defense. So they're pretty doggone good. But I think Ohio State would match up with them in a game, and I don't even think Alabama would be a full touchdown favorite. I think it'd be closer than that.
Wow, that's amazing. You said you think Clemson makes a return this year to what we've expected out of Clemson in the past. What makes you so confident that Dabo Swinney's guys are going to get back to being a playoff team again?
Well, like I said earlier, I put a great emphasis on defensive line. They've got the best defensive line in the country. I mean, they go 3 deep in guys that were PS number 1 or PS number 2, PS number 3 at worst. So that's a dominant defensive line. The whole defense, though, their linebackers I rate in the top 10, DBs in the top 10. They have my number 2 defense in the country next to Alabama. Now, their problem last year was quarterback play. DJ Uiagalelei had a 9-10 ratio, struggled all season. When I talked to their offense coordinator, Brandon Streeter, this year, going over the offense with them, he said DJ had lost 20 to 25 pounds, much more mobile. And they also worked on him getting rid of the ball quicker. And all the problems, all the sacks he took last year, wasn't necessarily the offensive line. A lot of it was DJ holding on to the ball too long. He was a vastly improved quarterback in the spring, and Streeter thought he looked more like he did in 20. Remember, he had big games against Boston College and Notre Dame that year. So I think improved quarterback play, a deep running back core, an improved offensive line, and a dominating defense led by the best defensive line in the country. Plus, factor in the schedule. They're probably their biggest opponent that they play in the Atlantic Division is NC State. Last year, NC State was one of those teams that had everybody back, and Clemson didn't. NC State was at home, and yet NC State needed overtime to beat them. This year, they've got to travel to Death Valley and play Clemson, and Clemson's got the revenge factor. They've got Death Valley going for them, and they're pretty close experience-wise as well, with Clemson now number 40 on the experience chart after being number 115 last year. So the one game this year that I've got Clemson not favored in is Notre Dame. I've got that one pick 'em, but that's not an ACC game, so I see Clemson running the table in the ACC this year.
Wow. A guy that's kind of a favorite of ours around here is now the head coach at Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman.
Love
What are
him.
your thoughts on Marcus taking over the Notre Dame job?
I think the way the players responded to him getting announced as a starter or as a head coach was a big thing. And talking to Coach Freeman, I mean, there's just an enthusiasm in the program with him there. And, most first-year head coaches, almost every second-year head coach I talk to tells me, Phil, we're in much better shape this year because we now know the players' strengths and weaknesses. The players know the system, and we've had our first full recruiting class. Well, guess what? Marcus Freeman has basically been there. His defense is already installed, and I've got their defense rated number 6 in the country this year. Offensively, I think Tyler Buchner comes in at the QB spot and does well. I've got their offensive line rated number 9. This is a legitimate team, and they're also strong on special teams. They rank in my top units in all 8 positions. Freeman brings an enthusiasm to the program. I think the players maybe the change was needed. Sometimes, you got a head coach there that's there for a long period of time. You get a brand new enthusiasm, and Freeman's just the guy to do it. So I think it was a great hire, and I think he's going to have a very good first year. I think they give Ohio Ohio State probably closer than the Vegas spread in the opener, which is over 2 touchdowns. And then you look at the rest of their schedule. I've got a toss-up game against Clemson and a toss-up game at USC, but they're very capable of winning both of those. So I think Freeman does well in this first year.
Wow. Another guy we like around here is Luke Fickell. Kind of did the impossible last year with UC, getting them into the playoffs. Thoughts on Luke? And does he stay at Cincinnati, or does he, at some point, does he take one of these power jobs?
Well, if you looked at the picture 2-3 years ago when Freeman's his defensive coordinator and Fickell's the head coach, and the Notre Dame spot opens up, you got to think Fickell's at Notre Dame, wouldn't you? But as it turned out, Freeman ended up going there, and he and Freeman are good buddies. Going over the team with Coach Fickell every year, you go back to 2017, and my Phil's book pages, which I send to the coach, and we go over every player on the team. They didn't have a lot of talent on it, and he has done a tremendous job building the talent. Now, they lose a lot. I mean, they had the best cornerback duo in the country with Kobe Bryant, Sauce Gardner. They had Myjai Sanders at the defensive end spot, a 3rd-round draft pick. Curtis Brooks, a 6th-round draft pick. They lose a lot off the defense. They lose their quarterback in Desmond Ridder. The MVP of that team is their running back, Jerome Ford. He's gone. They lose Pearson Young at quarterback. But I tell you, Fickell's done a tremendous job building this team, and I still like the talent they have left there. So I think they have a successful year this year. I think he's happy at Cincinnati. Cincinnati's going to the Big 12 now, so he could potentially go into the Big 12 and be one of the top teams there. So I think it's a pretty good situation for him. I think it's going to take a lot to have him leave, but I'll tell you, watching coaches build teams, as I do, talking to the coaches every year, Fickell's one of the best at what he's done at Cincinnati.
Wow. You talked at UC, Ohio State. More than likely, you feel they should go undefeated this year. When you look at that schedule, and I know you said you think Notre Dame is going to give them a pretty good game, who else on that schedule might kind of not really be something the fans are worried about, but you think can really, really cause problems maybe for Ohio State?
Probably the 2 games I'm most worried about would be back-to-back games. Iowa at home, Penn State on the road. Iowa's just a game where Kirk Ferentz is clearly one of the best head coaches out there. Iowa's got a super defense this year, and last year they caused a lot of turnovers. So if they can all of a sudden get a couple of key interceptions, key turnovers in that game, I think Iowa could give Ohio State a game. And then whiteout conditions at Penn State. And if you follow Ohio State, Penn State, Penn State gives Ohio State a battle every single year, and that one's whiteout conditions. So those would be the 2 that would come close. But as mentioned, I have Ohio State a double-digit favorite in every single game this year, including that one at Happy Valley, where right now they're a 13-point underdog, or Ohio State's a 13-point favorite in that game. So I do think they get through the schedule unscathed, but those back-to-back games are pretty tough with Iowa, Penn State.
Kirk?
Yeah, I was going to say, I always check on those back-to-backs because I remember in 17, I believe, when we played Penn State, when they had Saquon, it was a really good team they had. And then the next week we went on the road and played at Iowa, which is Iowa is one of the hardest places to play in the country, and people don't realize that because they just don't. People don't see it the way they see the whiteout. It doesn't have the publicity, I guess, but it is a tremendously hard place to play. And our guys, I don't know if anybody in our entire staff or any of the players had ever been to Iowa, and they went out there and just got absolutely waxed by Iowa. So I always look at the back-to-backs because, they're tough. I mean, if you have a night game and then you have to travel the next week, it is, people don't realize how hard that can be. Phil, something I was curious about, because I was thinking about back to the Braxton Miller days. Have you ever put an asterisk or adjusted your preseason predictions based on a preseason injury? I'm obviously thinking of the Braxton Miller year in 2014 where his shoulder fell out of the socket and he was done for the year. And have you ever had to backtrack on, you say, hey, I picked them to win the national title, Braxton Miller quarterback, and then shoulder falls out of the socket, he's out for the year? Or have you ever, I mean, I know once it's printed. I know you have a digital copy as well, but how do you manage that when something like that happens, like a catastrophic injury, either preseason or really early in the season?
Yeah, and you take a look, even some teams that happened to last year. Remember, Michael Penix wasn't really 100% start of the year. Indiana lost a couple of close games, and Penix out for the year, and they've got God knows who playing quarterback at the end of the year. And Indiana went from having a 6-2 record all the way down to 2-10. The unfortunate thing about the magazine is I can't adjust that. So, it's in print, like you said, and it's what you do. But I do a weekly newsletter called Inside the Press Box. And there I follow every game. I got 12 TVs in front of me, so I'm watching 12 games all day long on Saturday. I know the teams that are playing better than the final score would indicate, weaker than the final score. I watch the line of scrimmage during the games. So I adjust that clearly, based on the injuries and things like that during the course of the season. But that's the tough news about having a magazine in print is once you pick a team to finish in a certain spot, they all right, they lost their quarterback, running back, top 2 receivers from last year due to injury, but there's nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, I totally get that. So I'm gonna switch gears to the Notre Dame game. Obviously, it's probably the biggest home opener we've ever had. It's top 5 matchup. It's the first game. We're not opening with Akron or Youngstown State or somebody like that. It's Notre Dame game 1. Give us a couple keys for Ohio State to be victorious. Is it the O-line? Is it the new defense? What has to happen for Ohio State to win? And more importantly, for some people, to cover the spread?
Yeah, well, I think the key would be the 2 areas you talked about, Kirk. The offensive line is going to have to play well because Notre Dame's got an excellent defensive front 7. They're number 6 defensive line, number 10 set of linebackers, and they're solid in the secondary as well, number 5. If the offensive line can keep Stroud up and healthy and give him time to throw, that's going to help the Ohio State offense. And then defensively, we can't see any runs like that Oregon game. So if you can't have Chris Tyree or Audric Estem breaking runs during the course of the game due to breakdowns, maybe the new defense that Ohio State's installing, the players aren't completely up to date on it, and you can't have any of that. But the new defense is set up to stop the run, so I really don't anticipate that happening. Like I said, I think Notre Dame's a really good team. I would actually lean with Notre Dame plus the points in that game, just because of the fact they're well motivated, they're the underdog, and nobody's giving them a chance to win the game. Ohio State's over a 2-touchdown favorite, but I do think the Buckeyes clearly win that game.
Got it. Bank.
Yeah, there's been a kind of an old saying in college football and going back many years that teams improve most from between game 1 and game 2. And do you think that's true, number one? And if you do think it's true, do you think that the odds of Notre Dame upsetting Ohio State are better for the Irish to get Ohio State week 1?
Yes, I do think that is definitely true. And talking to the coaches, they feel it's true that you make your most improvement from week 1 to week 2 because now everybody's got the action and you're able to put the things into play. And yes, I do think Notre Dame catches Ohio State at the right time, playing them in week 1, especially with installing a new defense. So it's a good time for Notre Dame to play Ohio State in week 1. Great point you make there, Bill.
Okay. Kirk, I'm going to go back to one more thing. Going back phase, what were your thoughts, Phil, when Ohio State named Youngstown State head coach Jim Tressel as their head coach? Do you remember your thoughts on that move? And then what did you think of Jim Tressel in his career at Ohio State?
Well, I tell you, I had my questions. Can he step up going from the FCS coming up? I wondered about that, definitely. But the job that Jim Tressel did at Ohio State was simply amazing. I mean, Ohio State was a national title contender every year. They finally were beating Michigan, which is something they hadn't been doing. And I think he really turned it around. I've got to meet Coach Tressel a couple of times. So I'm very impressed with the man himself. And I thought he did a phenomenal job. But, clearly I had questions when he was hired about the move from the FCS to the FBS.
Right. Kirk?
Do you, I was going to say, just kind of with that, could that move be made in an era like today where I think athletic directors are really cognizant and influenced by public perception, the media, and the way that there's access now via the internet, social media? Obviously, we run a message board. What would it take for something like that to happen, to hire a 1AA coach to one of the, at the time, obviously Ohio State was a premier brand, but it was, they were a 7-5 program. you are what your record says you are. Could that happen again, where like an Alabama or a Clemson hires a 1AA coach to take the reins and be the guy? Could that happen again, Phil, you think?
Yeah, I think it'd be tougher for the a big team. You know, we've seen it happen. I mean, like Kansas State, for example, brings in North Dakota State's head coach, which is always a good move to go to North Dakota State. They're one of the premier teams out there, and Chris Kleiman's done a great job at K State. They could be a dark horse Big 12 team this year, but I don't know about going to a power team like Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, reaching down into the FCS level. I do think there are a lot of quality head coaches in the FCS, but it's a different game. You know, they have less scholarships down there, less fan base, and I think it'd be pretty tough nowadays to be able to pull that off. It surprised me a little bit when Ohio State did it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Phil, the last thing I'm going to have for you is I believe you said that you spoke to 120 out of 131 head coaches before the season.
Yes.
What's wrong with the other 11?
That's a good question. You know, sometimes the schedules don't jive. I've had coaches contact my media guy, and they're like, how about Tuesday at 3:00? And it's like, well, Phil's got a head coach Tuesday at 3:00. How about Thursday at 4:00? Well, coach has got a booster meeting at that time, and then all of a sudden, once you get to the last 2 weeks of the magazine, it's forget about it. I don't have time for. I'm just trying to make sure the magazine gets to the press with as perfect as possible, and I don't have time to talk. So sometimes you run out of time. I can tell you one of the coaches I haven't talked to is Nick Saban. That's okay. I've got so much information on Alabama. I'm not missing out on anything. But I talked to every coach in the ACC. I talked to every coach in the Pac-12. So it's not just the lower teams. There's been a few that I've missed out on, though.
Well, to me, the magazine is perfect, man. I appreciate you. Kirk, I don't know if you have anything else for Phil.
No, man. I just, again, Phil, just being cognizant of your time because this could go for 3 hours, and I know you'd be ready to kill us if we did that. But we could, because we know that you've got enough information and you have enough great stories to tell. But tell us real quick. You have a digital edition that you guys are updating through training camp. Obviously, Ohio State, they suffered a knee injury with Evan Pryor out for the year. You guys update those depth charts, I believe, up to the first kickoff. But tell us about your other formats outside of print, and also tell us where the print is available at.
Hey, I appreciate that, Kirk. The digital version, Learfield took over our digital version last year, and they said we could update the pages all the way through the start of the season. So we've been doing that. You take a look at Boston College, for example. They lost. They only had one offensive lineman returning in Mahogany, and he was clearly an All-American candidate. Now they lost Mahogany. Well, we've updated that in the digital magazine. They go from 1 to 0 returning starters and lost their star, and we downgrade the offensive line position a little bit there. So that's vital. The digital version, the hard copy, should be both used, I think. And then Phil Steele Plus is what I use. I tell you, I'll be honest with you guys. I go on my radio shows during the season, and I will just simply have Phil Steele Plus put one team on the left, one team on the right. Naturally, I've watched every game, but the numbers just jump out at you. Red and green, they're updated all season long. They've got an average game grade. It gives you NFL. It gives you FBS, and even FCS is completely covered. We've go back the last 10 years. So if anybody's playing an FCS team, you want to know about them, we've got it up there, a complete write-up on the team and everything. So this is really all we do is college football, 365 days a year, and it shows on Phil Steele Plus and the digital version as well. I thought we were talking about handicapping today, guys.
Hey, we got it. Well, we're not going to let him go without that. You have the greatest magazine in college football by far. You're also one of the top handicappers in college football. And gambling is now on the front porch now. It used to be in the back alley. Tell us, you have any picks for our list? And we do have readers that gamble, surprising as that is.
Well, I just want to
throw out there. Anything you want to throw out there for week one?
Well, I just wanted to throw out that how it's changed in college football, and I'll go back to the first year of my magazine, 1995. I was running a handicapping service, so I was putting out a weekly newsletter, and I had all this information. I put out the first magazine. It was loaded with gambling stats. But then as I started to talk to the head coaches, I started taking all that information out. We really reduced the amount of handicapping in the magazine, but at least I got the access to the coaches. And about 10 years ago, I started working with ESPN, and we even did a handicapping show that they stopped mid-season because they're like, well, we can't discuss the spreads. You have to not talk about
Yeah.
the spread specifically. And now all of a sudden you turn on ESPN. My last year at ESPN, they're like, okay, Phil, the spread's this on the game, and what do you think about this? And so it was really the whole outlook on betting in college football has drastically changed. My best play for the year, though, is if you see Ohio State at 10.5, jump on that thing right now. That's just easy money at the end of the year.
I think it's minus 250 though. Does that
Oh, okay. Well,
throw you a
you could
little?
probably play it to 11 then and bring it down to maybe minus 150, and still then you'd be pretty safe.
Anything else you'd like for week one? Any early picks you want to give us?
Yeah, well, I think one team to watch, I think this year that's going to be underrated, and you might want to play on them early, is going to be the Auburn Tigers. Auburn was just picked 7th in the SEC West. And I've got them tied for 3rd. And, all the talk in the offseason with Auburn is Brian Harsin, which must be a toxic situation. All these players are jumping ship and leaving the program. I've been doing this for 28 years. And when you get a first-year head coach and a lot of players leave, a lot of times that's a good sign. The bad apples are being eliminated. Everybody that's left has bought into the program. And talking to Coach Harsin, he feels, and talking to some of folks, insiders at Auburn, the players feel that this is a much more closely knit team. And keep in mind, the outlook on Auburn would be completely different if Bigsby doesn't run out of bounds and they beat Alabama last year. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at a team with a winning record that beat Alabama. So I think they're completely under the radar. Playing Auburn early in the year, I feel they will be 5-0 when they play Georgia. So play them in those first 5 games because there's a lot of line value in that. They're home against LSU, they're home against Penn State, and they're probably underdogs in both those games. Auburn's got one of the better home stadiums out there. So here's my advice: play Auburn in September. You're going to be looking at a 5-0 team at the end of September.
Wow, Kirk, how do you beat that?
I'm telling you, man, that's why he's the man. That's why he's the best. That's why I love having him on. Phil, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you guys coordinating, and obviously we coordinate for you. Anytime you've got a window for us, we're going to jump on and try to get you. But I hope to do this again soon. I absolutely love everything you do for college football. I love your magazine. And I just appreciate you guys taking the time for us at Buckeye Scoop, because it's always an honor. And Bank had never talked to you before, Bill. And I was like, man, you're going to love this. This is like, I mean, there's nobody in the world that knows more about college football than Phil Steele. And he'll drop something like the Auburn Tiger thing. And you're just like, wow, that's because we're so Ohio State centric that sometimes I don't even, the way you're college football centric, like we're kind of Ohio State centric. So, you dropping some of these things you did in the last half hour have just been incredible. So thank you so much, Phil.
Hey, a lot of fun. Always enjoy talking football with you, Kirk. And Bill, got to tell you, it was a great meeting you for the first time and chatting football with you. And definitely a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, Kirk.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Hey, I appreciate you. We'll do this again soon. So that being said, I'm going to wrap this thing up. The great Phil Steele, excellent as always, bringing the heat. Bill the Bank Greene having a great interview today. This was an amazing one. I mean, I love talking with these two and sharing how football's changed over the last 20 years. How Phil values teams, and it's something you're only going to get on Buckeye Scoops. I appreciate you guys so much. If you enjoyed this, leave us a like, comment. What was your favorite part of the interview? What do you think about Auburn? Some of these things, these little nuggets he gave you. These are some fun things that you get when you are a guy like Phil Steele who really, really knows the game. So that being said, as always, thank you, Buckeye Scoop family. Thank you, Buckeye Nation. We appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. You guys have a great rest of your day. Go Bucks.